Good morning to all. The clerk has confirmed that we have quorum of this meeting of the Debenture Committee for the City of Toronto, and I will now call meeting number 6 of the Debenture Committee to order. May I just ask that I think there may be somebody that hasn't muted their microphone and it's causing a bit of feedback in the sound system. And so, as you've probably figured out by now, the meeting is being held using the city's WebEx technology with members and city staff connecting by video conference or by calling in. And so we may have some technical issues as we go through this, but I'd ask for your patience with any delays or technical issues. Members of the public are able to observe this meeting. It's a public meeting on YouTube. Although we are in different locations and meeting remotely today, the Debenture Committee acknowledges that the land we are meeting on, we're all in different places, but I am at the City Hall, is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. And we also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Before we deal with the business of the day, may I ask the members of the committee, are there any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? And if there is an interest anybody has to declare, please indicate, please unmute your mic. And then indicate the nature of the interest and the item number that it applies to. Do I see any declarations of interest or hear any? Okay. Can I just call the roll here in effect in terms of the members of the committee? I see Councillor Crawford. I did. There he is. And I see Mr. Murray and myself. I think that's the members of the committee. Am I not right? We're the 3 members, or is Heather also a member of the committee? I forget sometimes.
She is a member of the committee.
So we're all members. Okay, so there's 4 of us that are here as members. That's fine, and that does constitute a quorum, but it's just so I know who I can call upon to do even this first thing, which is to have a motion to confirm the minutes of the Debenture Committee meeting of May 13, 2020. Can I have such a motion? Moved by Chris Murray, and I'll call the question. All those in favor, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. Thank you. All those in favor, any opposed? Motion is carried. We have 3 items on the agenda. And the first is item DB 6.1, the authority to issue a debenture. And it is based on a report from the Chief Financial Officer, which is before us, and the Treasurer with recommendations. And I will ask first if there are any questions of staff on this item. And if there's any questions of staff, please unmute your mic and let me know. That would apply mainly to you, Gary, and me. And I will have the usual questions. And it's covered in the report, and I just always feel it's appropriate to put it on the sort of public record as we sit here, that this is within our borrowing authority, that it complies with all the different requirements that are to be in place. And also, I always appreciate it, Heather, when you're able to provide us or your team just with a brief overview of how the market has been since the last time we were in the market when things were good. So maybe if you could just give a little tiny answer to that question, which is like a 2-minute summary on all of that, then it'll allow us just to have that on the record of this meeting.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. So the last time we met, as you mentioned, was early in May, and the markets were still in a nervous spot with regards to COVID and the overall outlook of the economy. The markets are still they are recovering, they have rebounded, but obviously investors are still nervous and are still cautious. So I'd just like to do a brief summary of this particular item. As you know, when we did meet in May, we spoke about the release of the social bond framework. So this particular item, in actual fact, is a social bond. It was 100 million and it's a 10-year bond. And this particular item is unique because it's the first public sector bond for Canada. We're the 3rd local government globally to actually issue a social bond, so we're quite pleased and proud of it. The bond itself was the $100 million placement. It was a 10-year bond. All-in costs were 1.665. And that speaks to where the markets are right now, in the sense of we're at historically low interest rates. And given the nervousness of investors, this particular bond was 4 times oversubscribed. which speaks to the confidence that investors have not only in the City of Toronto, but also the interest in social bond financing. This particular bond, the proceeds of it are funding the St. George Street revitalization, as well as 1,000 new shelter beds. The investors that received allocation of this bond, 91% of them actually have ESG mandates. We did have investors, obviously from Canada, US, but also Europe. The one thing that I would like to point out as well is that this totaled our debenture issue for 2020 is $300 million in total. As you know, we have a mandate of $1 billion, so we will be in the market in over the next 6 months with the remaining 700 million. And I know that you are always interested in knowing that the costs associated with servicing this debt are included in our 2020 budget, as well as our outlooks for the future years. And because of that, we're also compliant with the city's policy around 15% debt service limit of our overall tax levy. So just tried to do a 2-minute summary for you. Hopefully that helped, but happy to answer any questions.
The 1.665, where would that rate in terms of the borrowing costs that we've had for previous instruments? I just don't recall. We had some pretty good favorable terms on the green bonds, but how does that rate, the 1.665?
Yeah, so this is the most inexpensive, I don't want to say cheapest, but most inexpensive debt that the city has ever had. We actually got a better rate than the earlier May issue. But the fact that it's a social bond, we in actual fact were a basis point tighter than we would have been if it was a conventional debt. So again, we're in historical low levels, which is why we want to make sure that we take advantage of the remainder of our mandate in the next 6 months issue.
And does the well-publicized financial position of the city on an operating basis, if I can put it that way, as opposed to our balance sheet, does it? I mean, the marketplace sort of takes that into account in everything they do, but feels that we'll get that resolved one way or another. I mean, is there anything about that? I mean, and we're in the same position as many other cities across the country, and I don't know what you've heard in that regard about the general kind of feeling about municipal finance. Because I saw yesterday somebody adjusted the credit rating of the government of Canada, which is highly unusual. I think they did. So could you just give it a minute on that? Give us a minute on that.
Yeah, so we did speak to investors. There were investor questions with regards to how COVID was impacting the city. There is, I think, I would like to think that there is a strong level of confidence in how we are fiscally managing the city. We were able to answer their questions. We were able to demonstrate that we do have ways that we can manage the debt servicing, because that's really what they're interested in at the end of the day, is that their debt is safe. And so, as I mentioned, the debt servicing is included in our budget. It is included in our cash forecast, and they have enough confidence in the information that we provided that this was a safe investment. And that's reflective of the fact that it was 4 times oversubscribed.
Yeah, okay. Other questions by Councillor Crawford or by Chris, our city manager?
Yeah,
Gary,
Mr.
anything?
Yeah, just a quick question. Heather, you mentioned that this social bond was 1 basis point lower because it was a social bond. When we're looking at the next 700 million, how will you be approaching, potentially using social bonds with the rest of the $700 million?
So the social, in order for it to be a social bond, the funding needs to be directly correlated to projects that have the social outcomes that are outlined in our framework. What happens then is we match the amortization period of the bond with the actual project. So right now, for our first issuance, we may reopen the bond later this year, but we like to mix the terms of our debt between 10, 20, and 30-year instruments. We don't necessarily have social projects at this point that would actually support a 20 or a 30-year amortization period. So we are trying to look for opportunities to not only reopen the social bond because of the ESG mandates and the interest, but we do have to be mindful of the fact that we like to diversify the debt instruments so that we can manage the debt service costs.
Thank you.
Chris, City Manager, any questions for you?
No, Mr. Mayor, Heather and I talked about this report, I think it was last week, so I think we're fine.
Okay. So if there are no more questions from members of the committee, then I would ask if there's anybody that wants to speak on this before we put the question on this item, this first item to approve it. Any other questions? Okay. Anybody wishing to speak on this? Well, I will just say a word of thanks because, again, I'm very proud of the fact that on green finance, I was able to go overseas when we were trying to learn more about how to become a green finance center and know that we were in the vanguard of this. And I think we should be, both from the standpoint of showing our support for some of the causes that are financed by this money, but also using these instruments in an innovative way and, you know, taking some risk that you can go out in the marketplace and not have a 4 times oversubscription. You can have an under subscription. I don't think you'd do it if that was the case, but I just want to say thank you to everybody from yourself, Heather, through the whole team for that, because I think this is a proud accomplishment. And I think I might say a word about it at our news briefing today, because I think while we put out a release about it last week, these things don't get as much attention. But I think if I speak about it at the news briefing this afternoon, it will just show that we are out there doing things. And I think it also shows confidence in the city, which I think is a very important message to send just now, because there's a lot of people out there that are nervous about things, and I get that. But I would just say thank you to you, and I know that the committee members are going to vote to support this. So unless there's anybody else wanting to speak, Gary or Chris, go ahead, please.
Yeah, just very quickly, Mr. Mayor. Heather, in your 2-minute comment, you mentioned ESG. Could you just explain what ESG stands for and the importance to us?
Yes, thanks. So ESG is environmental, social, and governance principles, and really it's a way to evaluate an entity or an organization's mandate or interest in sustainability. And the City of Toronto is demonstrating that through its green bond program, and now with a social bond program. It's the commitment that we're demonstrating that we have on sustainability.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Heather. Okay, so can I just ask the clerk, I don't know if it's possible on our screen to display the recommendations that are here on this first item, DB 6.1. If not, we've all got them in our own circulations before the meeting, but is it possible to show it, clerk, or not? If it is, you're not unmuted. There we go. Perfect. Thank you. So there you can see the recommendations that grant authority to issue this bond and to introduce the necessary bills to the Debenture Committee, which will follow. May I have a motion to adopt the staff recommendations? I just can't, we'll have to go back to the tiles here. I have a motion from Mr. Murray, and I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Thank you. The second item is a further debenture, this one issued to the CMHC with respect to the Modular Homes project. You want to just, again, give a 1 minute on that, Heather, just in terms of its the nature of it, its compliance with all of our requisite requirements, and any different reaction from the marketplace with respect to this? I don't know if this was all done at once or whether it was done separately, but maybe you could just tell us about that.
Yeah, this particular instrument actually is done through CMHC. So this is just a joint funding arrangement that we have with.
It's really just secures their loan then, I guess, does it? Because they're lending us part of the money to finance the modular home. They're granting some and lending some.
That's correct. So we're actually not going into the market for this. This is just a direct arrangement with CMHC. There are some conditions that are attached to this, but from a social perspective, and this also aligns with the city's overall goal around affordable housing.
And this came up fairly quickly, so it can't have been in the plans in the context of our plans, but I guess because it's a relatively modest amount, it fits within our plans for 2020, or the basic budgets for 2020 and whatnot, and the debt service. Is there a debt servicing or is it interest free? I've forgotten now from the material here.
It's interest free.
That's what I thought. So there's no.
There's no debt. It's just the repayment aspect of it. And from an affordable housing perspective, there were amounts that were in our capital plan for affordable housing. So from a debt servicing issue, there was no impact on our overall outlook.
Okay. Are there other questions of staff on this from Chris or Gary? No? Okay. Anybody wanting to speak to it? Again, I'll just say thank you, Heather. I mean, I know it's something that the CMHC really just required as part of the documentation for the deal to secure their loan. But I think this was a huge step forward for us in terms of how quickly this all got done. The very fact we're having this meeting and approving the debenture today, the overall entering into of the agreements with CMHC and with the modular home manufacturer, which we did at the city council the last time. And, you know, there's some controversy, which Gary is more than familiar with about the thing locally, as always happens with these things. But I think it's going to be a huge step forward for us in terms of demonstrating that, you know, that we can make this kind of thing work. We'll see how it works over a period of time. But I just think it's a huge kind of innovation for us. I mean, knowing Vancouver's done it. And so I thank you very much for the part you've played in making sure that we could do what we had to do to document and secure the financing from CMHC. Are there any other comments anybody wants to make?
Mr. Mayor, the only other point I would make is that it also demonstrates the partnership. And as we, you know, as we're in a post or we're getting out of COVID, it demonstrates the need to be able to work in partnership with other levels of government. So I think it also is a strong indication that we can work with the federal government in a strong partnership.
Yes, and CMHC is I find very good to work with. I think they've been good partners for us in a lot of things, that rental financing project and a number of things. They've been very good. Okay, well, if there's no other comments, then I would ask again that the recommendations just be put up on the screen so we can all see them.
They're coming up now, sir.
Thank you very much. There they are. And this is for item DB 6.2, which is authorizing the debenture to CMHC to be issued to CMHC. And I think I saw Councillor Crawford moving the staff recommendations. And when we get back to the tiles, there we are. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. So the final item now is to enact the bylaws, item DB 6.3. And I have a motion to introduce and enact bills 438 and 439. I'll ask the clerk to display my motion, if you would. And it is so moved that the Debenture Committee pass and declare as bylaws Bill 438 and 439 prepared for the June 26th, 2020 meeting of the Debenture Committee. And if there are no questions or comments on that, we'll go back to the other screen. Thank you, Madam Clerk. And I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. I also have then, members, a motion to introduce to enact the confirming bill. And I'll ask the clerk to display my motion, which I will read. The Debenture Committee pass and declare as a bylaw a confirmatory bill to confirm the legislative proceedings of the Debenture Committee acting under delegated authority at meeting 6 on June 26th, 2020. I have so moved, and we'll come back and call the question on that. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. And if there's no other business anybody has to introduce, I will thank you all, including our staff, for putting things together and making this work technically. So I thank you for that. And that would conclude our business for today. And we will declare the meeting adjourned. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Bye-bye. Bye. You too.